the Careers Manager for the College of Medical, Veterinary and Life Sciences here at the University of Glasgow. Thank you very much for joining us today. Before we get started, I'd just like to go through a few housekeeping things so that you know how to participate in today's event. The event is a webinar, so your camera and microphones will not be turned on. If you want to ask a speaker a question, then please do so using the Q&A function at the right of your screen. Don't use the chat function, please. Also, a great facility about this platform is that you can upvote your peers' questions if you think they've got a fantastic question or it's very similar to the one that you want to ask rather. So don't use the chat function, use the Q&A function. It will be recorded, this webinar, and you'll find a copy of the presentation on the YouTube channel in a few weeks. But I do recommend that you write notes on the presentation slides and not rely on you receiving the PowerPoint, because lots of things can go wrong in the process. Anyway, that's me, that's the housekeeping. What I'd like to do now is to introduce our guests. Our guests today to talk about the NHS Scientist Training Programme are Lucy Miller, Laura Weir and Susan Johnson that are involved in the NHS SDP. I'd like to welcome them to the, I think it's called the stage, but to the screen. Anyway, hi Laura. Good to meet you today. Hi. Thank you. Just wait for the others to come up. The beauty of technology. Hi, Lucy. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Fiona.
So what we're going to do today, Laura, Susan and Lucy have got PowerPoint slides, which will take approximately 30 minutes. As I said, please take notes during this, and then we will answer your questions in the Q&A. Please make them as succinct as possible. Vote if you like that question, because then they'll come to the top of the list in terms of importance. Okay, once again, thank you, and over to you with the slides.
Can everyone see that there?
Yep, I can see it, Laura. Okay, so my name is Susan Johnston, and I'm first up today. And I'm here to talk to you in my capacity as a training officer for STPs in clinical biochemistry in an NHS hospital. I work in Glasgow Royal Infirmary. I'm followed today by two STP trainees, one of which who's working in clinical biochemistry in Scotland, the other who's in clinical genomics in England. So you'll be able to get a bit of a taste of the difference between the training in Scotland and south of the border. And what I hope to do is very briefly tell you a bit about the profession of clinical biochemistry in the NHS and about entrance to the STP programme in Scotland. So if you could put the next slide up for me, Laura, thanks. Fab. So we'll just start with a very brief introduction into what is clinical biochemistry. So this falls under the umbrella of pathology or the study of disease, and it's very much a patient-focused service, and it's led by us as a team of healthcare scientists. It's a huge team in clinical biochemistry that includes lab assistants, biomedical scientists, clinical scientists, and doctors. The laboratories are based in hospitals. They're not in research facilities or universities, for example. They're all in hospitals, and they're all open 24/7 for the provision of patient care. And basically, in a nutshell, biochemistry is concerned with the changes in the composition of the blood. So it's mainly blood analysis that we're doing. So what do we do in clinical biochemistry? We offer a huge spectrum of different tests. We have to be able to provide those tests very quickly. We're under huge pressure to provide results as quickly as possible in order to get a diagnosis and action for the patient. And then we also interpret the significance of these results and provide advice to other healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, etc. There are four main uses of our biochemistry tests. We use them to diagnose disease. We use them to test for the presence of a disease before it even appears clinically, so screening. We also monitor patients. Sometimes measuring a biochemistry test serially allows us to learn a lot about how a patient is responding to, for example, a cancer treatment. And we can use it to assess the prognosis of that disease. Also, importantly, we're involved in research and development and occasionally involved in clinical trials of new drugs. So I've just got a few short slides on the process itself within clinical biochemistry and how we work. So before we even receive a sample, a patient is going to present, for example, to their GP with a health concern. So the clinical biochemistry process always starts with a clinical question. The health professional doctor will take a clinical history and do a physical examination of the patient. A blood sample is taken. Tests are requested. It's all done electronically, or in the majority of cases electronically now. The GP, for example, will print out a barcode in the surgery, attach this to the blood tube, and it will make its way to the clinical biochemistry laboratory. When it is in the laboratory, we can scan that barcode and find out all the information we need about the patient. We can also find out what tests the doctor has requested and therefore direct the sample in the clinical biochemistry laboratory. What you can see in this slide are pictures of whole blood samples. Most of the tests we do in a clinical biochemistry lab are performed in the serum or plasma, which is a sort of yellow straw-like component of blood. And in order to get hold of this serum component, we have to centrifuge all the samples. And in this next slide, we move on to the sort of analytical component. So what do we actually do with this blood sample? Well, we use a plethora of different techniques. So everything that you will learn about in your undergraduate and postgraduate science degrees. We utilise enzyme assays, chromatography, immunoassays, which is looking at sort of antibody-antigen reactions. We utilise really sophisticated instrumentation. All of that instrumentation is interfaced with computers to allow doctors direct access to patient results when they are available. This slide is just a terrible picture, actually, now that I look at it, of our lab in Glasgow Royal Infirmary. This shows you one element of clinical biochemistry where the analysers are very robotic, they're heavily automated. The reason for this is that we have to produce results as quickly as possible. So if a patient comes into an accident, an emergency or casualty, what is this? Let's just hang on. Goodness me. Sorry, technical difficulties. Right, I'm back. So in order to provide a result for a patient who may present in a casualty or an accident and emergency within, say, 60 minutes, we really have to rely on technology. And labs have changed massively in the years that I've been working in biochemistry, and we now have really sophisticated automated robotic instruments that can do this for core routine biochemistry tests, such as tests of kidney function, looking at your liver, looking at your heart, for example. But not all biochemistry tests are automated like this and robotic. We still very much do hands-on science experiments. So me as a scientist and who's trained as a scientist, I still love a pipette and a test tube and a beaker, and we still offer that in the biochemistry laboratory with some of our specialist tests that we offer. So in clinical biochemistry, we have a number of specialist areas. Endocrinology, which is what I specialise in, which is the study of hormones, so work closely with things like assisted conception units and fertility units, investigating females with query polycystic ovarian disease. We have a trace elements unit, we have vitamins sections, and we have drugs of abuse, toxicology, paediatrics. These are all different specialist areas within clinical biochemistry. They're not available in every hospital. What we do is tend to centralise them in our large departments. So in Glasgow, for example, Glasgow Royal Infirmary and the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital have these specialist units. There are smaller district general hospitals in more remote areas that may just provide the automated core tests. In these large departments, as you can imagine, that's where we have the technology for these specialist tests and all of the expertise, the people know how to interpret the results. After we've performed the tests, we move into the post-analytical phase, and this is where we interpret the results that we've generated. So that's a huge part of a clinical biochemist job and what you will be trained to do as an STP, as a scientific trainee in clinical biochemistry. We review all the abnormal results. It would be absolutely impossible to look at all the results we generate. In Glasgow Royal, we get about 7,000 blood samples every day with an average of 20 tests requested on each of these. So as you can imagine, you couldn't possibly look at all the results. So all the normal results automatically go back to the clinician who's asked for them, and what we do as clinical biochemists is review all the abnormal results and then take action as required. That might be phoning a patient's GP, it might be writing some advice in the form of a comment that goes out with the result, for example. So moving on more to the sort of bit that you're going to be really interested in the recruitment part, healthcare scientists fall under 4 areas. There's clinical bioinformatics, physiological, clinical engineering and medical physics, and life sciences. I can only really talk to you today about the life sciences, as that's where I work, but as you can see from this, there are many, many opportunities for those who wish to pursue the STP in lots of different areas of science. But biochemistry itself falls under the life sciences. The way in which you are trained now as clinical biochemistry trainees has changed quite a lot in recent years. The Department of Health published a Modernising Scientific Careers document in 2010, which kind of changed UK-wide how we train scientists for the better. Ultimately, this is to meet the future needs of the NHS and provide a flexible career pathway to allow us to plan our workforce for the future in the NHS. So the STP itself lasts for 3 years. It's a very full-on 3 years, an intensive training programme. You're employed on a 3-year fixed-term contract and paid a salary. So you're effectively getting paid to be a student who is learning for 3 years. And you're salaried at what is termed Agenda for Change Band 6, so you can Google that and look up what an NHS salary at Band 6 is. It's a mixture of work-based learning coupled with academic learning. So for the biochemistry trainees, you would do on block release an MSc at the University of Manchester. With COVID restrictions, this is currently being run virtually, as opposed to the trainees going down to Manchester for a 5-week block. When you have completed your 3 years and your MSc, you then get a certificate of completion and apply to be a registered healthcare scientist working in the NHS. This is a summary that you can get from any website that discusses the STP training, and it just summarises what you do in your 3 years. Your first year in blood sciences, you would rotate around all the other blood sciences. So even if you were a clinical biochemistry trainee, you will spend time in genomics, immunology and haematology. Your second and third years, you then focus on your specific STB programme. So you would spend 2 years dedicated to clinical biochemistry and all the specialist areas within that. And you would also complete a master's project within your base hospital for the University of Manchester. Entry requirements, we are looking for a 2-1 or above honours degree in a relevant scientific subject. It doesn't have to be specifically in biochemistry, as long as you have a good scientific background. Postgrad qualifications are a bit of benefit, because as you can imagine, it's highly competitive to get into the STP programme. So in England, oh no, what's happened there? Can you all hear me? Laura, can you hear me? I don't know what happened there, it chucked me out. So in England, they recruit slightly differently to Scotland. Posts are generally advertised in the January with a closing time date in the February. You also have to do these online SJTs, which, if I can remember correctly, are situational judgment tests. So they're basically looking at, it's sort of, they give you a situation or a scenario, and they're looking at your behaviours and how you would respond to a particular situation. And these have replaced more sort of outdated like numeracy tests. Shortlisting in March with online interviews in May, and allocations confirmed in the June, starting in September. In Scotland, we have a completely different approach to recruitment. I think it's a more relaxed approach. We put adverts out for each specialty, usually around Easter time, so we're hoping to advertise in March, April next year. We have a traditional interview, which we've done virtually for the past 2 years for obvious reasons, with a September start date, so no online tests, etc., involved in the Scottish recruitment programme. It's NHS Education Scotland who pays your salaries. They commission the training in Scotland. They usually take on 20 posts a year for the life sciences. We are hoping that 3 or 4 of these every year are for biochemistry. We've asked for funding next year for 4 biochemistry STPs, and we already know that we in Glasgow would take one. Edinburgh have offered to train one, Lanarkshire, and NHS Grampian in Aberdeen. So they are the likely locations of the Scottish Clinical Biochemistry STPs next year. What I can't sell to you enough is the fact that this is a fabulous structured pathway. It's what enticed me into the job, and it's still to this day what I love about it. Very structured. You complete the STP, you become a state registered clinical scientist, saying that you're safe to practice in the NHS. And then you can work your way through at your own pace through professional exams. So you're continually learning, continually bettering yourself. And as soon as you pass these exams, you can work your way up the career ladder, ultimately trying to reach the top dog position, which is a consultant clinical scientist in the NHS. And my last slide, I think, is just a tiny bit about the day-to-day job. We're obviously interfacing with lots of other healthcare professionals. It's a hugely varied job. We're providing clinical and interpretive advice. We're performing specialist tests in the laboratory. We're improving patient care by developing, evaluating, and implementing new tests for patients. We're participating in teaching, research, and innovation. We're always keeping up to date with scientific literature. And ultimately, as you progress through the career, we dabble in management. And that, which I'll not run through for you, is just a whole host of really useful links if you're interested at all in this as a profession. And what I'd love to do now, and I'm sure you're going to really enjoy hearing from both Lucy and Laura, who are STPs at the moment, and they can give you a true insight into what it's like to be on the programme.
Thank you for that, Susan. So as Fiona introduced earlier, I'm Lucy. I am the Scottish trainee. I'm training in clinical biochemistry through in Edinburgh. And so what I'm going to talk to you guys today a bit about is just how I got on and the process of finding the STP, because I know it's not something that's particularly well advertised in the past, and we're hoping to try and make sure it is this time. So Susan covered quite a lot about the what is the STP, and now I'm going to talk about the why. So I very much was sat in your position, as you all are now, about 2 years ago. I did my undergraduate degree at Glasgow. I did it in biochemistry, and then I did a master's in 2020 at Glasgow as well in cancer research and precision oncology. And I remember going to all of these careers fairs, and there was a very, very big weight on doing a PhD or working in industry. And for a really long time, I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. I remember sitting on the internet and genuinely Googling, what can I do with a biochemistry degree? And all of the options that I could see weren't really appealing. And then I remember one day coming across the STP training program and thinking, oh, that sounds really interesting. It was a clinical application of all the knowledge that I gained over my degrees. And I thought it was a good way to help people. And that was something that really appealed. But there wasn't really much information out there. And I remember having to go to the ends of the earth to sort of network my way through, and going to Fiona and saying, do you know anything about it? And her not particularly knowing. So what we're here to do today is to tell you a bit about it and to give you a sort of foot in the door, if you will. So why the STP? As I said before, it's a real life application of the theory that you learn. And as Susan suggested, you do your master's, and then all of the knowledge that you gain over those 3 years doing the master's, you apply in real life in your job. It's a way to help people. You're working in a hospital, you're working in a hospital lab. All of the results that you report are going to the clinicians to help people. They help elucidate what's going on with a patient, and it's almost like Blue's Clues. You're finding out what's going on along the patient pathway. You're actively involved in clinical decision making. It's a two-way street between you and the clinicians, and you're helping them understand what's going on in the lab, and they're telling you information about the patient that you unfortunately don't get to see in person. You get a master's whilst you're working. I don't know many jobs that give you a degree for free and give you an opportunity to still learn whilst on a job. There's a great variety of breadth of working experience and learning. I really enjoy being able to apply what I learn in real life. It's a great opportunity to actually be actively learning rather than just sitting and scrolling through lectures, which I know, especially for you guys doing most of your degrees online, can be quite difficult, quite isolating. The ability to actually get in there and do things is great. And as Susan's highlighted before, it's a progressive career path. You're not just doing the training and then getting let out into the real world. There's a very, very structured sort of training program and then career post-training. So this is just a bit of a sort of diagram of the timeline of the STP and how I went about it and how it hopefully will be for you guys. So up in the top left corner was me graduating from U of G, getting those lovely pictures that hopefully you guys will actually have the opportunity to take this time. So I sort of started thinking about what I wanted to do. I remember going to Fiona in second year. I think that's probably slightly too early, but third year was when I truly started thinking about the STP. So in that summer of third year, I remember really, really wanting to get a summer project. I wanted to spend some time in the lab, because I know you guys all get your honours projects, and in your masters you get project time to spend in the lab. But I would suggest getting as much lab experience in that summer is a really key idea. And then in around sort of September of fourth year, I started to put the feelers out about the STP and start thinking about how I could get in contact with someone that knew anything about it, find out some more information before I applied. And then in December, that's when to start thinking about applications, not only for the English one because it happens beforehand, but also the Scottish one. It's never too early to start thinking about what you want to do, what specialism you'd like to do, and all sorts of things, getting things in place. Now, Laura can say a lot more about what happens in England in a minute, but in England, they tend to have the STP Open Day at Manchester University. I don't know whether it's the same for other specialisms out with genomics and haematology and biochemistry, but for life sciences in general, there's the Open Day in January. Who knows whether they'll do it online or in person this year? I'm assuming online, as with everything else. But it's a really good opportunity to go down and see the details for that particular year, see a bit more about the STP, see you can ask questions. There's all sorts of things that you can do on that day. They give you an opportunity to go and see inside a lab, and just things like that. And then in February, the English STP applications close. I don't know whether that's the same this year, but when I was applying, also another thing, I applied to both English and Scottish STP streams, so I saw that there was a question about that. You can apply to both. You can't just apply to one and the other. You can apply to both. So I applied to the English one and the Scottish one. I applied twice to both. Luckily, the second time around, I got into the Scottish one. So all I would say is just to keep applying. So in February, the English STP applications close, and then they go through a shortlisting phase where they basically have to read through all your applications and whittle the numbers down, because as you can tell by the number of people here today, quite a lot of people apply. And then they have the STP interviews for England in April. Whereas for Scotland, they have the March-May process. So you can apply to the English one, see how you go, and then apply to the Scottish one, or you can apply to the Scottish one outright. We're a good bunch in Scotland, I'd recommend. And then the September is when you start. So yes, so I applied to both. They're both very different sort of application processes. As Susan mentioned earlier, the English one has a lot more hoops to jump through to begin with before you can even talk to anyone, which I found quite difficult. But in the Scottish one, you put your application in, and then you either get an interview or you don't, which is, I'd say, possibly easier on the brain, because then you either know or you don't. But yeah, so next slide, please, Laura. So last year I sort of talked about the application a little bit more, but this year, because I've already done 1 year of training, I thought I'd come back and talk about some reflections after my first year. In my first year, I've completed all of my core rotations, which were in clinical biochemistry, immunology, hematology, and genetics. In first year, they give you a broad overview of life sciences, not that you can specialise in anything other than your own specialism, but it does give you an opportunity to see the departments that you'd be working with. And when you get phoned up about queries from different departments, at least you know what the tests are, so you can direct them in the right direction. And they've been really good. It's been really interesting to learn about different specialisms. You see how all of the different specialisms come together and work to provide a service for the NHS, and they don't work in isolation. Everyone works together. So some of the best bits have been spending time in biochemistry. It's been really good to get involved in the department, getting to know my colleagues, who are great. And you find quite a lot of them nowadays have been through the STP, so there's a lot of people with a lot of advice, which is great, because I know it can be a bit daunting starting out on this 3 years worth of training, but there's lots of people with tips and tricks along the way. And being able to get involved in projects that genuinely influence the running of the service. So in first year, it's quite difficult. You feel like you're a bit new and can't really get involved and don't want to step on anyone's toes, but it's been really good to have little things that you can call your own and help in little ways. It's also been really good spending time in different departments. There's a lot of networking, and U of G, they love to talk about networking. It's a great opportunity to talk to lots of different people, see what they do, get to know them, have contacts for the future, and as I said before, talk about what different tests are produced in different specialisms. Some of the not so good bits, as say before, it's difficult to feel useful within a busy department as a trainee, but I think that is also because of COVID. But I think the more you put yourself out there, the more that you gain from the training experience. So it's all right to feel a bit uncomfortable. You just have to sort of grin and bear it and get on, and you manage to do great things after that. There has been some disruption to training due to COVID-19, which is not anyone's fault, but it has brought about different opportunities that possibly wouldn't have happened before. I know it's meant that I've been able to go and visit different hospitals and do some of my rotations in other places, which has been great because I've been able to see how different labs work, the different equipment that they use, and it's also given me an opportunity to work on projects that work with all sorts of different hospitals, and it's just generally been great. I've really enjoyed the training program so far. The STP was definitely the thing that I wanted to do, and being a clinical biochemist was my dream job. So it's been great that the first year of training has been everything that I wanted it to be. I really would highly recommend it to anyone. I think if you're not quite set on what career you want to do, I'd say it's definitely something to look into. And if you look forward to helping people, didn't really want to do a medical degree, or if you want clinical application of your knowledge, then I would suggest it's the career for you. So some tips for a successful STP application, now that I can say I've had both unsuccessful and successful, I'd say it's quite balanced. My number one is don't panic. It can be quite daunting for both of them because you know that there's the competition that there is for the programme. But I would say research your specialism. I know that a lot of people don't really know what clinical biochemistry is, but there is information out there if you know where to look for it. And they really, really want you to know what your specialism is. They don't want people that are applying for any old random job. They want people that really know what they're applying for, are passionate about it, and they want to make use of their degree. They want to do the best with their career. So make sure that you're networking, make sure you're asking as many questions as possible. Now you have 3 people you can talk to about what the job is and how we got on. I would suggest just asking as many questions. If you have any questions, just come to us, or if you can find other people, then I would suggest doing that. Take your time with your application. Make sure you can provide clear examples for all of the sections. I'd suggest there's the NHS, they have 5 Cs. So they're sort of characteristic traits of people they employ within the NHS. And I'd suggest that's a good framework to go off when writing your application. So you can show skills of compassion and sort of confidence, things like that. Do your research and be yourself and show your enthusiasm. And that's pretty much all you need.
Yeah, so I'll just take over from Lucy now. So I'll kind of run through my slides quite quickly so that there's still some time for questions at the end as well. But we'll leave all our emails as well. So if you've got any other questions, you can get in touch with us. So I also completed my undergraduate and master's degrees at the University of Glasgow, and then I went on to apply to both the Scottish and the English STPs, and I was actually successful for the English one. So I crossed the border and moved to Newcastle. So yeah, my speciality is genomics, and that is the study of DNA to find pathogenic variants. This is also quite a big team in our labs. So we've got the clinical scientists that are mostly like based in the office. We've got the genetic technicians and MLEs who are all lab based. We're a bit different in that we are quite kind of more of a specialised service. We're not found at every hospital, but we're kind of based at these hubs. So you can see at the top, we've got the 4 main centres in Scotland, and then it's split into a few more different centres in England, and I'm based at the North Eastern Yorkshire GLH. Our labs are also a bit different in that we operate on a Monday to Friday basis, around 9 to 5, and then we look at both rare disease and cancer. There's a lot of different uses for genomic tests. The kind of classic one is the diagnosis, but there's also things like predictive testing for diseases that haven't started to manifest yet, disease monitoring, so that might be looking for a specific marker to see if it decreases with treatment, and you can also find targets for treatment, which, for example, in cancer would mean that specific treatments would be more effective for some patients than others. So there's a big variety of different things that we look at. The role of a clinical scientist in genomics is largely to look at the data that's produced by the lab, analyse this and interpret it and report it back to the clinicians that have requested it. We are mostly desk-based and we don't have very much patient contact. That's mostly within the first year of the STP on the rotations that's being talked about, but we're mostly in an office. We also participate in MDT meetings with other healthcare workers and also in research and development as well. So my experience so far, I've finished my first year now. So I did 4 rotations, which were a bit different from the biochemistry ones. So I started in genomics and then moved into bioinformatics. I did blood sciences. Not all the genomics students do blood science, but that's the one that we did because we've got quite close links with the blood science department here in Newcastle. And then also did genetic counselling, which was really interesting because that's like the patient-facing side of the role that I do. So that was really interesting to see. One of the best things I think about the STP is it's active on-the-job training. You're not sat just learning a bit of theory, especially in my centre, they kind of throw us in. So I've been running services myself and getting really involved, which I've really loved. Because in first year, it's a lot of observation. So I've really enjoyed getting involved now. And as you can see from the lovely photo on the right there, I'm about to start my master's project this year. So that's really exciting as well. There are also some not so good bits that Lucy kind of mentioned as well. A lot of departments aren't as aware of the STP, so you've kind of got to go in and explain what you need to get from their department when you're visiting. There is a lot of work for each rotation, and also juggling university and a full-time job can be quite difficult, but most departments tend to be quite aware of that, and they give you time for studying as well. It sometimes takes a while to get stuck into your department, but as I say, I'm kind of getting there now that I'm fully based there, so that's really good, but that's taken a whole year to kind of get round to that. So adjusting to that can be quite difficult, but as I say, yeah, it's been a really positive experience on the whole. I've really enjoyed it so far, and yeah, would really recommend it. Some quick tips for your application as well. I would really encourage you to look through the NHS Constitution, and there's the 6 NHS values here. What you can do is kind of maybe home in on a few of these and really demonstrate some examples about how you have shown these in your practice and how you would show that in the job if you got it. Always relate it kind of back to the role that you're looking to take. look through the curriculum library as well. That shows all the different things you need to tick off in your training. So if you've had a look at that, and it shows that you're really keen, and also the person specification, which is a general one for the STP. Those are things that you can really show off. And using the STAR technique will really help you to kind of get that down on paper. So working through the example fully and not just saying, for example, I work well in a team, but also on my own. It's really demonstrating that you have done this in the past and you'll apply that in future. So that was me really quickly. So we've got some time for questions now, but yeah, these are some more of the links, and we'll leave our emails at the end as well. So feel free to get in touch with anything you want to know.
Thank you all three very much for the presentations. A lot of really great advice. Can I just, before we go on to the questions, of which there's many, I just wanted to further your points about, please look at the careers website on the University of Glasgow. Lots of information, mention the STAR techniques. Also, would be really great, we have invested in the career service in a tool for psychometric tests. Now, it was mentioned on the English application, you have to do an SJT, which is a situational judgment test, and this is what's called as a psychometric test. That's the sort of overarching term. We've got this tool where you can practice lots of different tests, not just that one, numeracy, literacy, critical thinking. It's completely free for you to use. So log on to the career service, you'll find it, and you can create your own dashboard and practice to your heart's content. Okay, on to the questions. So the top ones, you may have kind of answered this question already, but in the interest of time, I just wondered if we could start with Susan or Laura or Lucy. What do you think are the top skills you're looking for in a candidate? So maybe when you look at the application, what are you looking for? Susan.
So I read the application forms every year for the Scottish Clinical Biochemistry training programme. And as Lucy alluded to in her talk, what we are looking for is that you absolutely know what you're applying for, so that you know that you're applying for the STP training programme, you know what the STP training programme is all about and what's involved, that you've done your research, and that you're passionate about learning more about clinical biochemistry and putting your sort of if that was what you're applying for, and putting your undergrad knowledge to good use. So it's not skills per se that we are looking for, it's knowledge of the career and an enthusiasm that's what you want to pursue, and that's what stands out a mile on the application forms.
So it's a very targeted application they're writing, not just cookie cutter answer.
No, can't use it really for any other jobs. It's got to be targeted, and that we know that you've looked into it. It's a niche area, and only a handful of posts and very competitive. So we're looking to see that you've done your research.
Thank you. Laura and Lucy, have you got anything to add to what are the top skills you're looking for in a candidate?
I don't know about you, Laura. I think Susan's covered everything. It's just about showing that you're passionate about the role, you really want to do it, you know what it is that you want to do, and applying anything that you've done in your life so far to the job role and the characteristics that they're questioning you about. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Now, we've got two questions that kind of are the same, and it's about lab experience. One, it says, how much lab experience are you expected to have? And this is followed closely with the lack of lab experience due to lockdown go against us. So, Susan, can you start with answering that question, please?
Yeah, I mean, we are very sympathetic to students in science at the moment, and we absolutely understand that you can't get lab experience, you can't go and do summer placements like the good old days, or very rarely anyway, and even laboratory experience in your undergraduate degree might have been upset or unable to do so as a result of COVID restrictions. So we're absolutely sympathetic to that. So we are not looking for oodles of lab experience, just an enthusiasm to learn, a knowledge of what techniques you might use in the laboratory you hope to work in. So again, it's that you've done your reading, but you would not be penalised in any way due to lack of lab experience. Even pre-COVID, it was very difficult to get experience in laboratories or science, and COVID's just made that all the more difficult.
Cool, thank you very much for that. We've got this question, you've answered it, but I'm going to say, can you apply to positions in the STP programme in England and Wales and Scotland? And also, curiosity for me, what about Wales and Northern Ireland? We are UK. What happens to that? Two questions there. So England and Scotland, and then what happens to Wales and Northern Ireland?
So you can apply to them all, and we would actively encourage that. If it's the STP, if you know this is the career for you, I think all of us probably here speakers today applied to them all. We just wanted into the programme. It's 3 years, and then once you're qualified, you can start to look for jobs in areas that you really want to live and work. But if you're just keen to get into the programme, apply to them all.
Can I just, so there are 4 programmes, are there? One in Wales and one in Northern Ireland, as well as England and Scotland?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Excellent. Next question. Okay, I think that's sort of, it says, where do you gain experience before you've applied for the programme? Now, I mean, to me, this is an age-old question that we get time and time again for anything. And it doesn't, in my opinion, and it'd be good to know as scientists, that experience of work can be gained in non-science backgrounds. Now, because I'm always pushing volunteering or working consumer-facing roles like retail, hotels, that sort of thing. How much do you take notice of those sort of things on an application?
Oh, do you want me to be really honest?
Yes, I do.
I don't.
I do.
I'm looking for, in terms of experience, this is very unique, but in terms of, we absolutely read everybody's application form, and yes, things will stand out. But in terms of whether that makes you a better STP, I don't really take it into consideration. I'm just looking for those that have researched the role. And in terms of experience, the best thing you can do is pick up the phone and speak to a clinical scientist or an STP trainee. We're hoping that we can start introducing visits back into laboratories now as we kind of come out of all the lockdown periods. But if you can't, an email or a phone call, we would count that as valuable experience, just having spoken to somebody in the job.
That's great, thank you. Networking, thanks very much. It's still banging on about the networking and LinkedIn. So, okie dokie, next question. Does the NHS Scientist Programme also involve other specialities of lab medicine, like pathology and microbiology? You did allude to this. I don't know if you want to...
I think there's about 34 different specialisms overall, and covers a lot of different things like medical physics and microbiology. There's loads of different things. You can find it all on the National School website.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. If you want to find out any information about what specialties are on offer, that's on the National School website, which Laura had in the slides.
Okay, thank you. We've got another 5 minutes. We've been given an extra 5 minutes. We are honoured to carry on with the questions, which are great. I'm loving this voting system. If you don't get in, what would you recommend doing to increase your chances in terms of jobs and masters, PhDs?
This is a really common question, and Lucy could answer this for you because she was in that situation and she came to us and said, "What can I do?" And so it's been a mixed bag. Some people have gone off and done masters that interest them. That's not always an option for people. Financially, that can just be rule it out. And things like if there are any jobs in laboratories, we've had people come and take up sort of laboratory assistant posts and get to know the workings of a clinical laboratory and then reapply and been successful. It's been quite a mixed bag. I think you've got to do something that you're passionate about. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you go away and do a 4-year PhD if you don't think that that's going to be of use to you. But if you wish to do further education in an MSc or try and get some laboratory experience, it doesn't need to be in the field you're working in. We've had applicants in biochemistry who went off to work in an immunology lab, for example, as a lab assistant and then become successful in the programme.
Thank you. Next question, can people doing an MSc in biotechnology apply?
Yeah, do you mean apply for clinical biochemistry or apply for a relevant STP?
Yes, well, it says for the training. I'm assuming it's the STP that this 11 people have voted for in the question.
So if you have a look, like Laura had said on the National School website at the list of the 34 different STPs, you might find one that's more suited to you having done biotechnology. If you're meaning by the question, could you apply for biochemistry? Yes, if you've got a relevant scientific science undergrad, then yes, absolutely. if this career appeals to you.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Are all of the STPs, such as the Genomics, where's that gone, offered in Scotland, or do you need to go to England for some of them?
So the jobs are advertised based on the needs of the NHS. So they look at the workforce every year of the staff in the NHS, and we will apply for or advertise for STPs in the areas where we know there are a number of people going to retire, for example. So they're not always in Scotland. They may be spread out around the country for the more niche areas. We can't guarantee that there will be positions in all STP specialisms within Scotland.
So they vary according to need?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We've got, you mentioned a summer lab project. How would I find similar opportunities?
So I remember that being particularly difficult because you go everywhere and everyone is trying to get into the small number of labs that there are, particularly at Glasgow and elsewhere. But I would suggest just talk to your lecturers. If you see someone's doing research, because quite a lot of our lecturers ended up being PIs, particular lab groups. If you find that they're doing research in an area that you're interested in, see whether they have an opportunity to take a student over summer, see whether there's someone doing a PhD that would like someone to come along and help them do some work for their PhD. Just keep talking to people, and it's just persistence is key, because you'll get a lot of knockbacks, but it's just worth it to persist.
Yeah, I just sent a lot of emails to different people. Yeah. I think I didn't end up getting an actual summer one, but I just got kind of a few weeks of work experience in different labs. And even though that was only a few weeks and it wasn't directly related to genetics, it was still lab experience I could talk about in my application. So.
Okay. I'm getting a knock from my colleague to end the session. So much that there's some really great questions there to be answered. We have to leave now. So just wanted to say thanks very much to Laura, Susan and Lucy. It's a great presentation. It's hugely popular by our students, and I think you've given them a real taster for it. So thank you once again. Have a nice day, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Lots of cups.